No, it's
yeah,
silly.
yeah.
Like dogs are not.
Yeah.
So cute. And this is him playing with
Yeah,
her.
I totally forgot.
Oh,
Yeah. Is he gonna be
Yeah, it seems
huge?
like it could be.
Or someone that's huge?
65
Okay.
pounds, 70 pounds.
It'll
Big,
look
but
bigger
not.
because of all the hair, right?
Oh. Because he would get wet,
Yeah, yeah.
or when you put him in a PFD, like all the fur sticks out the armpits and the hip bones.
It's so funny.
Yeah,
I love
it's
that.
really funny.
Then
All right.
got some deal to where I guess they.
I made it on time, just here.
Hello, you made
And
it.
Trish is on the run also.
Sorry, I was here.
Cool.
They're talking about archery ranges.
Archery.
I'm trying to build an archery range
Cool.
at OSTA. I know, right?
Nice.
My kids would be there. They both are
Exactly.
kind of into it. Both have their little setup.
I'm working on it. I got a little bit of money. I wrote a grant for the state and I didn't get it. It was hilarious. Chris Baird writes back and he goes, bummer.
All right, why don't we call the order for something? 4:31. We have OB, Steve, Makeda, myself, and Jerry here in person and Tony online. And I think Erin is somewhere in Europe. So
Wow.
fancy trip. So, all right, we will begin with citizens to be heard. We've got two folks in the waiting room. How are we doing this? We're just letting them in and then I think it's just,
Be very careful.
You know who they are.
Sarah Maldikoff texted me that she was joining, and then I think that's Mark Horowitz, so I think we're good with both of them.
You heard we got hit at the county commission too.
Oh,
No,
A
really?
little bit more porn
Oh
to
my
lighten our, yeah.
So fun, great. All right, Mark Horowitz, you here to make a comment or just to listen? Oh, he's connecting to audio. We'll come back to Mark. Sarah, are you here to make a comment?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
You can, if you wouldn't mind stating your full name, and we're gonna try and keep comments to about 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
I will be much shorter. It's Sarah Leah Melnikov. And I was calling to discuss the proposal for the plan for the tailings pile. I know you aren't making a decision today, but I did look at the plan and I have some very deep concerns about it. First of all, there's no culinary water there at all. And with human caused climate change, water is declining. Where will the water come from? Number two, noise and light pollution are not addressed in the plan, and those could be humongous issues going forward. Then I saw there's no talk of remediation of the cliff up to the railroad. I don't know why that is. And it's kind of ironic that the plan says there will be no overnight accommodations, probably to protect people from radioactivity. But what about the workers that'll be there day after day after day after day? They will definitely be subjected to radioactive poisoning, I would think. And then, like, why not name it for a native word for flowing water or something of that nature instead of Founders Park? And the last thing I'll say is, given that we are, the reason human-caused climate change is accelerating at an earth-ending pace, why not just naturalize this area to mitigate that impact and also to protect wildlife and healing of the planet? That was it. It was probably under a minute.
Thank you for your comments, Sarah.
Thank you. See you later. See you later.
And we had Mark online, but it looks like he left, so we'll see if he joins in the next 5 minutes or so. We'll give him a chance to speak. Otherwise, we'll see if he can join us at our 6 o'clock. Right, so we will move on to ex parte communications and disclosures. Anyone have anything to share?
I do, Emily.
Yes, go ahead, Tony.
So, several weeks ago, I was approached by the Sloan Law Firm LLC. They are representing the Steelbender Development Planned Unit Development, which this body voted to not recommend several months ago. Sloan Law Firm wanted to know my apprehension with the project. I was in a dissenting vote, and what things that they could do to mitigate my concerns. And so I sat down with Alyssa's staff, refreshed myself on the details of the project, and more or less addressed three main points that were the reasons I dissented to recommend that. The first one being the density scaling, proportion of units to developable land. And I was informed by county staff and Alyssa's people that there is a specific, I think it's Land Use Code Chapter 4 that addresses that. And so if they can satisfy that section of the land use code, that was one of my concerns. Secondly, I was concerned about proposed public access to some recreation resources on the other side of their property. I wanted to see something in the master development plan about perpetual public access. We don't want people changing their mind and charging a fee or, you know, losing that incentive. So they also talked about water, and I told them that they need to satisfy the city and whatever water is going on with them, as well as running it by Obi, who knows a lot more about the water situation than I do. So just wanted, that is a very hefty ex parte communication that I wanted to disclose, just let you know. I gave them those 3 bullet points and let them know that if they could address them, I would consider that more favorably in the future. I didn't commit any sort of decision.
Yeah. The Sloan Law Firm also reached out to me, similarly asking for general attitudes related to that type of development. And again, did not make any commitment for or against whatsoever, but shared similar feedback that I think water, appropriate density, and balancing of housing for local workforce was really the thing that I was looking for in terms of any project that came before the Planning Commission. And I've been very public about that. So but thank you, Tony, as well. Anyone else have anything to share?
Yeah, they approached me also, and my general sentiment was just like, what will you give us as a community? You know, what are you bringing to the table if you're asking for higher density? And so it was an interesting conversation. I made, again, that's our sentiment, or like at least my sentiment. So
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm glad we're sharing that. I will say the definition of ex parte communications, not that we shouldn't be saying, you know, sharing this, but I also think that probably exceeds what is necessary. But I also love, just in terms of it's not a specific application in front of us, if there's any questions about future.
I'd only say if it were a specific application, then that's about what we want to know, because
Exactly.
we want to
That's
make sure we know what he heard so we can consider it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
And,
Cool.
and maybe Alyssa's people can advise there, but I know it's not a planned unit development anymore, and it's not necessarily in front of us, but Steel Bender Development does currently have some sort of paperwork active with the planning department, right? I could be wrong about that, but I thought I gathered that they had not a planned unit development, but something else.
I don't think they had ever submitted their application, like they were talking about submitting just the base density application, just what's entitled without a PUD. But I don't think they ever did, right?
They're in process of the conditional use permit.
Oh, the conditional use permit, that's what it was. Yeah, so that part of it is, that's the CUP in order to be able to develop in the water source protection overlay, but it's not a subdivision application at this point.
Okay.
So that's what's going on, yeah.
So, but that would still come
They
before
would,
us.
they would
as a-
have to, yes.
administratively.
Well,
I'm not sure if
no,
that-
it would go straight to county
Okay,
commission.
with the changes to title.
Or it would just be conditional use permit approved or denied for development in that overlay. All right?
And as I recall, in the water protection zone, they could be required to do a study of the
What-
impact, right?
Which I think they're
Yeah, they have
doing.
submitted
And
that.
They've
they've
submitted
had a
that.
study.
It's
Mhm.
currently in the hands of the city for review.
Yeah, with Chuck, yeah. And so then if they were approved for that, then they could submit their application for a PUD or just go forward with a subdivision application.
Any further comments? We will move on to After the Pile, North Moab Gateway Area Community Vision.
I'm trying to, do you like the pile? Or you like the title? Yeah.
Yeah, Emily, I've got to jump back to ex parte communications for a second.
Okay, jump away.
I just gonna state for the record, I serve on the Site Futures Committee and on the UMFA Project Steering Committee in my professional capacity. So I'm gonna recuse myself of any discussion about this specific topic because it steps on my real job.
All right, thank you, Tony.
Tony, could we ask you questions? Because I was actually thinking of asking you some questions about it.
Yeah, Obi, I think I can answer any questions specifically related to river management and the plan in my capacity as the DNR river manager. And I'll make it explicit that I am speaking in that capacity when I answer. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Ready?
Ready?
Saxon and I were gonna make this presentation, but Saxon's not available. She was on the committee. She did a lot of work along with Noel. And Ronnie also was on the committee, Tony, Alyssa. We have a list of all the committee members on our slideshow, but I wanted to start to see if you all have an understanding of the history of how this whole tailings pile process moved along, how we got to where we are. So very briefly, so they decided to move the tailings pile in 2005, and the county at that time established the Moab Tailings Steering Committee. And it was established by resolution, so it does have the authority by the council to provide a form and a mechanism for open communication and monitoring of the UMTA project during its operation, and to advise the council on matters pertaining to the project and to seek appropriate future uses of the Moab site and the Crescent Junction site upon completion of the project. So Mary and Ronnie and I have been advocating for funding for this project for years. And the funding levels fluctuate, and now we're at a level where we're actually gonna see the project actually get to the finish line probably in our lifetime. We weren't expecting that to happen. The other thing that the council did, and through the planning office, was establish a conditional use permit. And as you all may be aware, to get the Department of Energy or a federal agency to sign on to our planning procedures is not, I mean, they could have just said, no, we're not gonna do it, but they did. And so every year they come to us with the compliance with their conditional use permit, which we require. And I do wanna say that one of the things in this conditional use permit that you need to be aware of is that we also have final mill site reclamation. And what this says is, following the completion of the remediation of the project, the applicant, the DOE, will restore the mill site to pre-site disturbance near natural state, characterized by riparian zones along the river and a series of riverine meadows interspersed with cottonwood groves ranging from small groupings to 10 or more acres, transitioning to uplands. And the final reclamation plan will be approved by the Grant County Council. So we include that in here. I think that was very thoughtful of us to think about how we wanted it to look when they were done. And they're doing that now. The DOE has the groves of trees that are growing along the river, and they've cleaned out all the tamarisk and done a lot of really good things that kind of help us to get to that end. So I just thought that that would be good for you guys to know. One of the things that we decided to do in 2013 is develop a site plan for that area, because we were trying to get money. And every time we go back to DC, they would say, what are you doing there? You know, why do you need this money? What's the big plan? So in 2013, we came up with a plan. The county council and the Moab City Council approved that plan. And part of it was to relook at it every 5 years, because things change, needs change. So we're on the third reiteration of this plan. And so that's what we have before you today. And so just keep in mind, this is a vision more than anything else. We don't even know who's going to end up with the property. We want the county and the city, you know, or the county and the city, and we're not sure how that's going to look. It's something that we're working on in terms of making sure that we end up with all the work that we put into this, that we end up with that property. It's 435 acres. Majority of it can't be developed. It's on a floodplain. So with the input of community members, and we can go through that, we will. We got a lot of input and ideas of what we would like to see there once we're able to retain the property. Alyssa, is that good enough?
Yes, very good.
All right, so, so here's all the members of the committee. You can see we have the BLM, the Park Service, we have City, County, Planning Commission, and a couple of people at large. We had the Economic Development Department involved. And so we had a lot, and Tony, of course, was there. We had a lot of really diverse people on that committee to help us with the plan, including, most importantly, the community. So we're at the 5-year update. This is the third reiteration, as I said. The purpose is to get community input, adjust facility recommendations, refine site guidelines, and request ongoing funding for the project. And again, we feel that it's important for the Plan Commission to see this because someday that property will be developed, and it's actually now zoned as a spa area, which is a specialty.
Did you say spa?
Spa, yeah. That was a Richard Grice.
It's all the mud.
Yeah. It's a specially permitted area, I think. And so I think it's zoned RR, so, and there really can't be any housing on the site, any long-term housing. So, you know, we had to be really, we had to take that all out of the picture, but you guys will at some point be seeing this from a planning and zoning perspective in more detail when we get to that point, which probably won't be for several years. So here's the timeline. We started this process in July of last year. We hosted an open house public comment period that went through January. We made a recommendation, and the Moab Tailing Steering Committee recommended endorsing this plan. Now it's coming to you, and then we hope that you guys will endorse it as well, and then it will go to the Grand County Commission and then the Moab City Council for endorsement. And I can't stress how important that is, because basically we're creating a document. When we're not here, none of us sitting around this table or up there on the commission dais or the city dais are around. We have a document to guide the next generation of folks. So that's really important, and it does have staying power. So I think it's really important to understand that. So we came up with a mission for the committee: conduct a public planning process, develop a community vision for potential future use of the former Atlas Uranium Mill site property. And then our vision is basically to cooperate, of course, with the Department of Energy and provide a large range of social, physical, economic, and community-focused amenities. And basically our 10 principles were collaborate, partnership, community vision and need, prioritize health and safety, short and long-term sources of funding, sound planning, phased multi-year implementation. Some of the things on this project can be implemented tomorrow if we wanted them to. We also want to utilize as much of what the Department of Energy is going to leave there so that we can use it for future use. We wanted environmental, sustainable, and energy conservation to be part of it, resource conservation, and then of course the existing right-of-ways and deed restrictions. And Noelle, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah.
This was your thing. This was great.
So just to chat a little bit about the public engagement part of the process, we had, we kind of kicked it off with an open house in November that was attended by 25 or so people. And we had maps up of the old community vision. And we had people go through with sticky notes and say, oh, I like this. I want this to be bigger. We should have this here instead. We had a survey that they filled out in person as well. And people were really engaged. We had families there. It was a fun event. And then that kicked off our public comment period, which went from mid-November all the way to the end of January. And we had 179 survey responses, which was a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of varied members of the community. And so the way we structured the survey was we had this very quantitative side to it that we're seeing the results of on the screen. And that was just ranking all of the different facilities that were proposed in the 2018 version. And there's just on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this sort of use? And so you can see the event center, trails, boat ramp, transit center, view areas. People were really excited about those. And then you get down towards the bottom of the list and there had been a food service, like a food court situation that was proposed, Federal Resource Agency offices, an inland beach to kind of divert part of the river to create a little beach area, and people really weren't into that. And so we have these very quantitative responses, but then we also ask people, how has the community changed since the last vision, and what sort of resources do you think the community needs now that we didn't take into account in 2018, and just that sort of thing. And so in terms of general trends and results, as I had mentioned, strong support for the top section, not as much support for lots of food service and inland beach and things like that. And we had a question that was generally like, what is your vision for this site? And astoundingly, everyone was saying, we want it to be for the locals. We don't want it to be another tourist draw. We want to really support the local community. It was really cool to see a lot of people really felt that way. And a lot of people also had a lot more sustainability and environmental practices in mind. They said, please conserve water, like native plants, and just general sustainability, which was really cool to see. Everyone really excited about that. And so based on that, we have updated the map, and I can actually pass this around as well. We'll show it to you in a little bit.
I see the pickleball courts. Was Mary involved in this? Oh,
We had to put it somewhere.
I hear the word pickleball come out of her mouth one more time.
that word.
So this is just an overview of some of the things that we changed. There was a splash pad that was added to kind of get rid of the inland beach, pickleball courts, riverside view spots. There's a cool trail system, and there's like dedicated spots where you could stop and have a bench and look at the river. A food truck area to kind of get rid of the food court, like existing building style. So during events, you could have food trucks show up, that sort of thing. And especially for the event center, a lot of people were really excited about that, and specifically about an outdoor amphitheater, very similar to the one in Grand Junction. And there was a little bit of confusion between like an indoor performance center and convention center and the event center, but all of the written comments had said, we just want an outdoor amphitheater. So part of that was we got rid of the indoor performance and convention center, as well as federal offices, artist village, food court, etc. Let's see, what else am I missing? There was going to be a dedicated ice rink, like a reflection pool turned into an ice rink that instead we're pitching as sports courts, kind of like tennis courts that can be turned into an ice rink, and just other little tweaks. Also, using some of the existing Department of Energy buildings as potentially temporary local government offices, and then in the future, like very down the road, using that space as more of a technical or scientific business campus, similar to in Grand Junction. They have kind of an outdoor rec business campus. So I don't know if I'm missing anything. But based on that, we have this new map. And so just a couple things to note. The size of Swanee Park, for comparison, really puts things into perspective, with the event center being almost the size of Swanee.
Okay.
And you can see it kind of in the corner here. Let's see. I don't know if you want to take this.
Yeah, I can. So you can see there's a green line that goes around the pile. Well, the pink is floodplain. You can't put anything there that's mowed wash. When the river comes up, you'll see it this year. It's all gonna be underwater. And so the green line on the riverside is an already existing trail that the Department of Energy put in. And then the yellow dotted green line around the rest of the property is a trail we'd like to put in. And you can see most of the development is up there on the northwest corner. And so, you know, it's very simple. There's not a whole lot. There's the event center, the amphitheater, there's parking, there is sports courts. I mean, it is, you know, if you look at the map, you can see everything. There's an area in case we want to put a sewer treatment plant in there, we can do that. In terms of a water source, there is no water source, nor do I think we want to use water there. It would probably have to be trucked in. You know, but I don't see a lot of water being used at the site, other than for the amphitheater. And then across,
By the splash pad would be
yeah,
water.
there would be water, but it would be recycled water.
Okay.
You know, keep in mind, we haven't gotten into the really deep
Right.
details. This is just a vision of, you know, what we would like to see. There's a boat ramp. You know, we talked to Tony about this at length, so you can see where that's located. We thought it would be good to have, you know, if there's gonna be a boat ramp across from Lions Park, to have another one down here that's maybe more designated. Can't remember if we decided this was gonna be motorized or not. I think non-motorized.
Not suggested.
Yeah.
Right.
So, that's really it. I just feel like.
And the transit center.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we are working right now with Union Pacific. Mary and I met with the Union Pacific senior public relations guy. We want the Rocky Mountaineer to end up down there. So that stuff is that Rocky Mountaineer is gonna probably eventually end up, that's gonna be the drop-off point and pickup point. UP's indicated that that's something they're very interested in. We've also talked about long-term other rail service, just regular, not luxury, but regular passenger service. That's a little bit more complicated, but I think those conversations are gonna be ongoing. But I just wanted to let you guys know also is that the Department of Energy and our congressional delegation is very impressed with our community and how we basically did this on our own, you know, and most communities, they have federal, there's like special names for them, and, you know, it's all coordinated, and they might have a little bit of assistance from the federal government, and we didn't do any of that. We just, that's how we are, we just took it, you know, did it on our own, and they're very, very impressed. And so hopefully that's gonna help us actually gain possession of that property because of all the work that we put into it. So I don't know if there's any questions that you guys might have. Yes.
I have a couple questions, but this transit event center that's the amphitheater.
Yes.
I wonder if you labeled it that way. I know my wife would say an event center, no, an amphitheater, yes, probably.
Right.
So if it's really gonna be an outdoor amphitheater, I think I'd just
Sure.
say that on the map. I had some concerns that darn Sarah speaking earlier stole many of them. But Prospector Community Park also struck me as, my first thought was, oh, well, it's the Riverside Park. Then my dear wife said, what about the native name? So just
Yeah.
like Sarah said, for this or for Riverside or for whatever the area was. I had water use. I understand you probably don't know, is this the best use of water? How much is going to be used? Although I would certainly like to see the area have plants on it again. A concern I don't know what we do about is just my fear with radiation, right? So there is in there, well, we would never drill a well there because of radiation. We don't want people to live there overnight because of radiation. Brings up the thing about workers and brings up the thing of, is any exposure? And I don't really know enough about radioactivity. There used to be in the toxic movement, this thing that would say, some toxics are like, you've got, a rabbit with a gun, boom, boom, just shooting around. And the longer you're there, the more likely you are to have something go wrong with your immune system. So I really am concerned with the radiation, and this is terrible. It's the thing I don't trust people on, not you guys, right? I mean, you don't say it's all good, but there've been so many of these things with toxics anyway, where they say, oh, well, this is the place you could build a school or build a park. And I would feel very bad if it exposed people. I'm
Sure.
glad it's getting taken away, and I'm glad it's getting lower radiation, but it always worries me. So those are concerns.
Good concerns. In terms of the radon exposure, legacy management which is another side of the Department of Energy, they're gonna be monitoring the site for 80 to 100 years. So even if Grant County and Moab City end up owning the site, we're gonna have to be partnering with the legacy management section of the Department of Energy. So I understand your concerns. We're concerned about that too. But in a lot of this stuff, we're gonna have to bring in fill to cover up. You know, we can't just, they're gonna go down 6 feet. They're not gonna go, there's still gonna be contamination of the soil. And so what they did over in Grand Junction was they brought in fill, 2 feet of fill. And so we're working with the Department of Energy to see if there's a way that they can bring dirt down so that when they expose that we can cover it back up. So we would absolutely not do anything that would be unsafe for the community, and we would have to work with legacy management and others to make sure that site is, good enough for us to be there for 4 hours. I don't know how many workers will be out there, not sure about that, but something that we definitely don't want to happen. The name, that came from Norm Boyd, who used to work out there, is kind of history. And so I know the idea of the native name is a great idea, but there is a history to the miners in our community. I mean, that's another side of history that I think he really thought should be carried on, through this project so that people could remember what they went through. A lot of those folks that died, a lot of those folks didn't even know what they were getting themselves into. And so, and that of course is up for discussion too. This is just something that we came up with. And we wanted to respect that historical presence on this side. But we can work on that, because I had the same, I don't know about that name, and I kind of got embarrassed.
Well, that's kind
Well,
of
we-
interesting because the people that were here before any of us or the descendants here, that's also history, right? So
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting in the
conversation.
conditional use permit, returning it to its pre-disturbed state would therefore suggest that the prospector history is part of the disturbance. And to return it to its original state would be to represent those that were here before we dug.
Well, you know what it looked like? It had one cottonwood tree on it. It was a complete floodplain. There was nothing there. I have seen pictures of it. So it wasn't, it's gonna look a lot better now than it did before. Because there was not much there before. But I hear what you guys are saying. There's certainly.
Well, I guess
And there's-
the other part of that, though, is giving it a name that recognizes what happened to it might help prevent that again.
Right.
So, I think there's a good argument either way, actually.
And it isn't, and it'd be interesting to have 6 or 7 names and ask people what they thought.
That's exactly, that's what I would do. Yeah.
Or maybe there's any way to name the whole thing, something, and then a section of it a different thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the site history exhibits here that are really important, and we obviously want to honor people that lost their lives and their health and all the things.
Yep.
So.
From a radiation standpoint, Obi, I think you brought up a really good point, and when you brought it up, it occurred to me that question is gonna come up over and over again and probably for decades. So has the team thought of any ways to address that with the public? Like build up
No,
a
we
plan
have
to have
not.
communication about,
We kind of leave that up. Well, we do have the liaison, Jessica Thatcher, who, that's her job, is to make sure that we're safe. And so she reports every quarter when we have our meetings about the level of radon and, I don't even remember, there's 3 things. Ronnie, do you remember the 3?
time shielding and distance,
Radon, is it ammonia? I can't remember.
the 3 elements.
Just gamma particles, radon and
Oh, sorry,
isotopes.
ammonia types, yeah. We've been talking about it for so long, it's so bad that I can't remember.
Yeah.
There's 3 that we monitor, and there's 28 sites around the site, and so we see what's going up and out in the air. But absolutely, we would have to address that. If we're going to open it up to the public, we would have to let the public,
And I guess
inform them.
that was my point, is if the land is gonna get any use in the future, people are gonna know what was there, and they're gonna ask, is it safe? And there should be there should be some way to communicate to that people for the decades to come.
Yeah.
There's, I don't, again, this is way out of my purview. But
All
like,
of our experts.
yeah, it's not even my expertise, but I wonder, like, just thinking about people being concerned, right? Yeah, obviously gonna be a spectrum of people who are concerned, right? Concerned or not concerned, but like what you're saying is having transparency about those levels and people being able to find that information clearly and easily somewhere, I think would
Can't
probably
right
be
now on
helpful.
the
So,
DOE site. Yeah, Ronnie.
Oh, I can just add a bunch of stuff that might help you guys. So, I mean, obviously, like the mayor said, this is a preliminary vision, right? But we've had the benefit of having a lot of meetings with the Department of Energy, both the Environmental Management Office and the Legacy Management Office, who will be involved in perpetuity. And so if I were you, especially with your planning hats on, I would view it as a trajectory in which certainly on the path coming, there's no way anybody would ask you to accept this, you know, the way it is today. Like you and the community would be given the opportunity to have all the information we've been giving and more, because they always tell us, you know, we don't, you know, you guys can draw up a vision, but we can't tell you now, you know, what the eventual topography is going to look like. We don't know how deep the groundwater is going to be. After you move all the tailings, you have to do groundwater remediation for years and years, and that can affect the topography. Plus you have the washes coming through. So they will tell us, we don't know for sure what it's going to end up looking for, but we can tell you according to federal guidelines and all the other projects we've done around the country, this is the standard we're shooting for. You shoot for it as clean as possible, but sometimes there are certain characteristics of the site where you find, oh, okay, we're gonna have to have, and sorry, I'm gonna forget the phrase right now, but optimal is it's clean enough to live on, right? And then there's a whole slew in a range of, okay, well, you know, maybe in this spot of the site, you know, you can only have a parking lot. Like they explained to us at the site in Grand Junction, like, okay, we decided here, you know, we could do this, but here, you know, we're just gonna do the parking lot, and housing is not okay here, but it would be okay within so many feet off site. Because I know one of the things we discussed about, you know, people wanted to see a dog park. And one of the things that often happens with this site, if you don't want to do soil disturbance, they will clean to a certain depth. But like in Grand Junction, they decided, okay, we don't want to see soil disturbance. So, you know, soil either can't leave here, it has to be to a closed site, but you can sometimes fill with something else. So just know there should be a lot more information coming, and they never hand over a site until they decide it's clean, and then with the standards where they tell you, you know, these things will be okay, but you know, we're not happy about this. Same with like the buildings, like ultimately, you know, everybody would look at it and they would say, you can keep this infrastructure, keep this road, you can keep this building, or they'll say, no, we don't think so, it needs to come down. So there will be a lot more information coming about, yeah, what it'll ultimately look like and what is possible, just in case that helps, just because I know it helped me to talk to them and hear about all the other sites they've worked on and understand, okay, well, these are the federal guidelines we're dealing with, and these are the, you know, they get into the numbers, which are a bit beyond me, but, you know, we get down into, you know, cleaning within so many pico cherries, and, you know, so that was really helpful to hear, but just know, you know, someone in your situation would be, you know, if this happened, then it went to the city and county, you would be provided with all of that, and the community would have the opportunity to ask all those questions. I don't think anybody wants anyone to be in a situation where they have questions. And I think also, like, great advice between now and then, and I'm sure we would have time to do another one, but I think one thing that was really helpful to the mayor and other people on the site features committee is that we were invited by a bunch of officials in Grand Junction, people who worked on the Grand Junction site, to go see what they did with the Las Colonias Park there that used to be their mill site. So that was kind of helpful to see what they've done and why, and how they're paying for it, and how, because that's another component of all this. So in case all that's helpful, and just know, yeah, we do consider, like, part of what you'll be able to do at this site will be, you know, largely dictated by sewer and water.
Yeah.
Like, what, if anything, will be possible? What, if anything, do you want to invest in? So yeah, just know nobody's just assuming that that's going to happen. I think the idea is, yeah, you'll spend the next years kind of figuring out what your options are. And the great thing about the report is it's several dozen pages, so it gets into the nitty gritty a little more. Like at water, it talks a little bit about, you know, you can't use groundwater because of the remediation and also some other issues there. But, you know, okay, so what would your options be? either nothing or truck it in very expensive. Colorado River rides, okay, a whole complicated thing there. Potentially hooking up or working with the district that's there. So yeah, it's, but just consider it at its baby stage. Yeah, we look at, and sorry not to take up too much room. But
Yeah, and there's opportunity too, we have the welcome center, we can always put, I think we do want to have a history of what happened there, and we can at that point, when people pull in, they go look, and we can at that point say, hey.
That's the storyboard opportunity right there. And then what is it today? Is it safe to use? The answer is yes, and this is.
Exactly.
Right.
So I know this is early planning and you're not to this point at the map level, but in terms of first principles, given especially the amount of asphalt on the ground, I would love to see this adopt the type of planning that encouraged retention over detention below any asphalt areas, that didn't allow for raised curbs, but instead enforced development that allowed water to return to the ground. I'd even love to see exploration of, I know one of the very popular ideas people have shared over the last several years outside of this planning process is solar power. And I'd love to see with this amount of asphalt and the heat generation it produces, could that be a place where there could be covered solar parking, which is something that I'm surprised we don't more.
Yeah,
That's all, it's all in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
fantastic.
We have like a 30-page report that goes so much more into all the
Right.
details of each facility and.
Which I read diligently to the detail.
But yes,
That's
and
totally-
you guys,
yeah.
once we get to the development of the site, you guys are gonna be able to ask all those questions of whoever it's gonna be. It might be you, it might be Grant County that's doing it.
I guess what I'm, as a signaling device to future planners, I just love to see the planning principles outlined in a little more direct and obvious way, as things do get lost in the details of 30-page reports. Just to kind of guide, and I think it could also be a really strong signal for other similar development that may happen in the county, whether that's a potential future parking structure in the city or a potential transit center down on 191 in the county, to kind of start to say where we have this type of transit-oriented development, we think it should be ecologically innovative, I guess. So, but yes, in the report, thank you. Wonderful. All right. Anything else from our guests in terms of this presentation?
One question, definitely don't have to get into the weeds on it. It's maybe kind of just to serve as a bit of a reminder, if anything. But I'm just kind of curious what sort of, I guess it's more of like a philosophical question. I've heard the feedback from, residents being that they want this for, local usage. Well, that's great, but what we all know, when word gets out, right? And so I guess philosophically, like, what is the thought of, okay, well, we'd love this to be for locals, but how will the planning reflect when the masses come in, when word gets out about how awesome it is?
Well, the reality is, it's gonna be for locals and visitors. The visitors, we're not gonna be able to designate it locals only, But there are aspects of it that, are kind of, like the river points. I mean, there's the trail system. I mean, there are aspects that I think a lot of our visitors are not gonna necessarily want to come to the site and ride around the bike, maybe. But we really can't, as we plan for this, we planned it based on what our local community wanted. Hoping that they'll actually utilize it, knowing that it's gonna be both. Does that make sense?
Let's assume the ice rink will be for local.
Right.
The ice rink, all the folks here in January.
Oh,
But yeah, I mean, we'd love for locals to utilize it. I'm not, and that the planning purpose was for our local residences.
And I say that more just, I can see a situation where, well, we're kind of planning for locals, and then what happens when we get 5 to 10 40-foot RVs that want to come in, and it just clogs up everything, and then it's just like a total cluster. So I think that's more of the spirit of why I bring that up.
Well,
That's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point.
Coach buses too.
Because it'll happen unless there's, I mean, how can we nudge things in a
More local way.
or not even that, just so that way we're planning for, well, those large things, or there's a sign, no vehicles over 30. I don't know if we can do that, but.
I get the
Yeah,
sense that'll come
that's
in
an
later
interesting-
planning
yeah,
phases,
sure.
but I do think
That's a
it's
good
important to raise it and make it part of the conversation.
And to be
Because I think
fair,
the footprint
yeah.
will, I think, really affect that greatly, and that's early stages of things, so.
there's a ton of parking here, so hopefully there would be an area for.
The parking was kind of like, we're thinking Arches National Park.
Yeah.
You know, that was why that's in there. People, they actually end up having a shuttle system someday.
But that
Make it
feels
work.
much more oriented towards visitors than locals. I think that's where
Well, it's a
it
parking
starts to
lot,
tip.
so, you know, what are you gonna do?
And just know, I mean, there was a range of philosophies and you'll have time to debate that because you can also focus much more on public transit, make it much
Right.
more about, hopefully by that time an expanded public transit system because we thought, okay, let's, if it was today, let's have a mat bus stop, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully over time, you could have the train come in, you could have some kind of bus system going to town and much more about like access by bicycles and maybe more parking focused on, handicap spaces or something, but less about vehicle parking and.
I guess even with the Swanee Park comparison, I'm surprised there's this much asphalt on the map. I would like to see
Yeah.
personally that cut in half, and I think it could still retain its usage, and but that's for later stages.
I guess unless there's purpose, and if it needs a cap, then.
Yeah.
Then do it, right?
It
And
says
that
to
could
me-
happen too.
Illegal overnight camping, giant RVs and tour buses.
You know,
and-
Maybe the storyboard can help eliminate some of that.
All right.
Yeah, well, a lot of planning. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of
What's
planning.
that?
We're probably, like Ronnie said, we're probably gonna redo this again in 5 years.
Sure.
We don't anticipate anything happening out there for at least another 5 years. And in the meantime, we're gonna be working to get the land transferred to us, to the local government. Which is, this is another reason why we have this map, because we can say, hey, this is what we wanna do.
Yeah.
So give it to us, so we can do it.
I know you kind of just addressed this, and that's my question, it's moving target, but is there any sort of like idea of like, maybe it'll be done roughly in this window of time?
3 to
Not
5
done, sorry, this
Oh.
not done, but like
Then
ready for
moving
us
the
to start
pile.
doing something, yeah.
We don't really know, but we're kind of guessing on the fact that there's 2.5 million tons left, and they're moving 1 million a year. If we're
Right.
looking at 3 to 5 years where the dirt will be done,
Right.
all the dirt will be moved.
Yeah.
And then we can, then we have to look for money, to do all this stuff. So, I'm thinking in 5 years, we'll be redoing this again with the idea of this is real. This is what we can do.
See it.
And
Cool.
this is what we can do tomorrow. And this is what we need to go out and find money to do.
Honestly, if the
Awesome.
community decided, I assume there would be a prioritization of cost and ease and maintenance. So it seems like some of the earliest things you could do, and it might take you a long time to get past that, would be, trail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be that way for a while.
Yeah, the trail and the river viewpoints. We can do those like that as soon as we can have access.
Oh, well, I mean, here is a concern. So in what order this sort of gets done? Because in part I'm hearing, well, this is a way to kind of, keep funds on the table maybe. But I'm just gonna make this up. Let's say that you got funds for an indoor convention center. And then the plan is, well, but you've got to get that approved, let's say by Grand County or the city. It's a funny project when you've gone out and gotten money on the basis of this plan and then ask people whether they approve it. And that's what the money was gotten for. It's a little bit different than a developer coming to us and saying,
Right.
hey, I'm gonna build a convention center, and you say that's not appropriate for this land. So I'm a little, the question is, I understand this plan is not gonna be the real plan probably, because 5 years from now, we'll have a new plan. But I'm worried that the plan could drive, that's a terrible thing to say, the plan could drive the planning. When the plan gets approved by us, gets approved by the city, And then maybe funding starts, ideas of funding and maybe some funding start before we get the land.
That's definitely, you know, from human history, probably something to remain concerned about. At this point, probably because this plan, you know, doesn't have total legs until Department of Energy signs up on the site, says what's allowed. Nobody could go and raise money at this point because you really don't know what's going to be allowed. But I think, you know, that is a good human lesson to, yeah.
Right now, the only thing that's probably for sure is the Rocky Mountaineer moving down there to unload and upload their visitors.
And will that be at their cost or at our community's cost, or?
It would be at their cost.
Well, why don't we move to consideration of the action item? Yeah, feels to everybody.
We had an action.
We had a potential to endorse, right?
Oh.
Do we not have a motion associated? I just had it
Endorse.
at a presentation.
Next
On the agenda. Was that in the date? So today, May 8th, present and requesting endorsement. So they're requesting an endorsement. Are we allowed to, it's not a legislative item, so we don't need a
Right.
hearing.
So, yeah, we could go ahead and do that. I just didn't have it on the agenda under action items, but
Right, but okay, cool. But we're okay to take
I would
action.
think so.
Okay. So with that, we'll entertain a motion to endorse or to choose not to endorse, I guess. And we'll need a second and then we'll open up discussion if there's anything further. I think Steve, you started.
Yes.
Motion.
I make a motion to support
Recommend, probably,
to recommend that the planning commission support.
or
Yeah, it's a recommend.
recommend to the county commission
Yes.
to endorse.
Make a motion to send a favorable recommendation to the county commission to support the continued planning efforts of the mayor. The after the pile plan.
No, no, keep it.
So let me just make sure I heard that right. So Steve moves to send a favorable recommendation for endorsement, maybe of the
North Moab Gateway Area Community Vision 2023 plan.
fabulous. Second,
Well said, Steve.
Second.
second by Maketa. All right. Steve and Maketa, first up, any discussion from either of you?
That's what we've got 5 more years to think about it, so.
Yeah, I think there were some really interesting comments raised that could be adopted a little more directly in an endorsement by the county commission, but I think we'll leave that to the county commission to discuss. So, any other discussion?
You got that, Trish?
Got it. It's on YouTube. Get notes. Did anyone have any questions for Tony? I know, Obi, you would raise that.
I think not. I was gonna ask Tony about radiation. But Tony told me he's not qualified to talk about it.
That's exactly right, Obi. That is what I would say.
Growing a little bit, Tony.
Oh, man.
He's highly qualified in many areas, but
Not that one. All right. So Tony is recusing. Any further discussion by members of the planning commission? If not, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion by Steve, seconded by Maketa, to send a favorable recommendation for endorsement, raise your hand. All opposed?
I'm gonna abstain.
Abstaining.
I probably wouldn't have abstained if there hadn't been 4 votes for it, but
All right. So
Questions?
four in favor of, rather, 1 abstention and 1 recusal and 1 on vacation. So we're good to go. Okay, thank you so much. Very exciting. I know a
Thank
lot of
you.
hard work went into
Yeah.
this.
For a
So
lot
thank
of years.
thank you for fielding all of our questions as well.
thank you.
All right. So we will move on to our county commission liaison, Trish.
I think the only thing of interest from the last meeting was the various ADOs that went through or not. I made a motion to deny the Murphy Lane ADO, and Bill seconded it with me. I had actually talked to him before the meeting to see if he was interested in providing a second, which he did. And We had a lot of public concern for that ADO, and actually after visiting the site, and I went on a Sunday morning, in general, the management hasn't been super receptive to neighbors and their concerns about the existing site. And so the idea of then piling 32 more on top of it, it just didn't seem real palatable to me. It's a very nice area, and I think that expansion of that site would have had a lot of impact on residents all around that area. And yeah, so that was my take. And also I know that Kevin there is quite a few more intent to apply coming to the table. A lot of them are right on 191 again, I believe, at least the few that I saw. And so I think we're going to be able to fill those niches and not be impacting, really quiet residential areas. I think that we're going to be able to fill up that 150. Was that the 150? So we passed 77, I believe.
No, I think it was 77 were left.
73 approved, 77 left.
73.
There's 85 proposed.
Okay, so anyways, I want to state that, and so that actually, the denial passed 5-1, one abstention, I think Kevin abstained, and then the other 3 passed, no problem. The other 3 were, the swamp and then the 2 on 191.
If lack of respect of our local laws is used to justify the lack of housing for people who aren't in a position to buy single-family lots on half-acre to 1-acre lots, how does the county move to remove that as an excuse to provide housing in pleasurable areas to people who aren't in that class, I guess? Like, I understand in this case, that there were a number of pre-existing complaints. If the county isn't enforcing our laws, and so we're telling people who can't afford to buy property that, well, we don't have options for you, but there's some nice places by 191. It just feels like we're shifting the burden onto members of our workforce and people who aren't in a position to buy property, as opposed to the county managing the burden of enforcing its laws. Putting aside this individual property, as we go into future land use maps and as we talk about places where the county may be able to support additional density, I'm very concerned that will continue to become the vocal opposition that keeps people who aren't in the position to protect their quiet neighborhoods from even being able to live here, work here, rent here, buy here. And I think that conversation needs to be had at a much more systemic level. I think it would be a real shame if people who work here get stuck on the highway and people who have been able to buy here sometime in the last 10 or 15 years get to have their nice quiet neighborhoods. And I say that as somebody who lives in a nice quiet neighborhood. So I'm well aware of the intent and the need to protect them, and I support that. But I think, how do we find a balance so that enforcement of our laws isn't the reason we can't support it? Maybe there's other places it's not appropriate for other reasons. I would, as a citizen, but also as a member of this body, really like to just revisit that as a county.
Okay. I don't really know how to respond to that. It's not a nice, quiet neighborhood as it sits right now. I mean, they have, those neighbors are carrying a fairly large burden right there. There's a high density right there. I can't remember how many trailers, I want to say altogether, there's, I think 50 with the trailer park and the RV park behind it.
I'm not speaking about just that specific
right.
property, but what I'm saying is if any development can create noise, like at least we can enforce our existing laws so that we can look
I
at
agree
developments
with you.
based off of the future planning and appropriateness and not historic lack of following our laws, I guess.
Right,
Like if
right.
people have historically,
I
as property owners, not followed our laws, I can understand not wanting to support a development by that property owner, but
Right.
I hear noise come up consistently as a concern, and then things like that are pointed to as evidence. And I wish we could take that complaint off the table by enforcing our laws, and then.
I agree with you.
So, but I think the county is in the position, or they are the ones who are empowered to act. And people who want to build housing for themselves or their workers are not empowered to act on enforcement. So that's just a concern I have going forward.
That was an interesting
property too, because it has the overlay, the overnight accommodations overlay on a portion of it,
Right, exactly.
which I think is probably the source of all of those
Exactly.
complaints.
Yeah.
And so those
You're right.
kinds of, like, the overnight use is a lot more intensive.
Yeah,
in term-
exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
as
I
opposed to
totally,
like the long-term.
yeah,
But so
I
that's why
totally
think
agree
it was
with you.
Kind of a
Right.
tricky one. to
It's a tricky
consider.
one. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, the little bit of time that I spent there, I probably sat there for half an hour. And it was a Sunday morning after a large event, and all I heard was trucks and trailers being pulled out and dust being generated. I won't even say that. I think they didn't even have road base down to prevent the dust, and it's a pretty large impact too.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think longer term, residents wouldn't have that impact.
And you would have had to give up the overlay? or
No,
were they
it was on
doing an
a different
extension?
part of the property.
Different
that was
property.
outside of
Right,
it.
right. So, okay.
Right.
Well, that was
Yeah.
a comment just more generally, but it's,
Yeah.
you know, our discussions before the meeting of.
Yeah,
lack of
I
enforcement,
totally agree
it's-
with you.
It's a, yeah.
I agree. Right. We need to do a better job with enforcement. Yep.
Is there any efforts being made in that direction? We keep talking about it and I'm not
We
hearing a
have
lot
a
about
code
it.
enforcement,
Mhm.
we have a code enforcer.
Yes. I'm
Yeah,
aware
we're
of that, yeah.
we're still trying to work with EDD, the Economic Development Department, to purchase the monitoring software for illegal nightly rentals to make sure, so that we can enforce those more easily and more proactively instead of it being based on complaints. And
Yeah.
So that will be a big difference once we get that going, but I mean, it's also like, there's a difference between enforcing for illegal nightly rentals, we're pretty well on top of that.
Yeah.
But then there's the enforcement of illegal camping.
Right.
Where you're not allowed to live in an RV outside of an ADO development, of course. And that is a little more tricky because you're displacing somebody from their
Yes.
home.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that I know Josh and I have talked about, like maybe bringing that topic to the commission, because we are dealing with those complaints increasingly right now.
Right.
And it's hard, I think he's in a really tough position to, we're not evicting people, but, you know.
I mean, this is a random aside and it'd be interesting just to, I don't want to get into a discussion. But I like the idea of, we have an ADU, right? I like the idea of giving everybody an RV site too. Now we could, the backlash can begin right now, but my thought is, I really do think it would support Josh in the fact that so when you see these illegal campers and they're all over, I'll tell you what, the valley it's nuts. And people aren't complaining because it is providing housing. We hopefully it's not just providing like overnight accommodations, which it could be. We don't know. But I think if you give everybody one and one, then it's this very blatant, like if Josh is, and I do feel it shouldn't just be complaint driven. I think the code enforcement should be on the ground. That's my opinion. I can shoot the message. That's just my opinion. It's just my opinion. I'm not speaking for the commission. But it just makes it easy. He's out once a week. He does a tour. He's like, boom, they've got one and one. I just move around. It's easy. But that's just maybe something we revisit. Maybe it's already been brought up and shot down, but an idea.
I do know 10-ish years ago, the planning commission and county commission looked into that.
Okay.
And the issue came down to insurance. So it might be worth just revisiting if that is something that is surmountable, or if there was, was that stopped short for other reasons. But I ran into somebody sometime in the last several months who was on the planning commission at that time, and they told me
Okay.
there was actually quite a positive push in that direction, but it was
Okay, stop.
administrative
Okay.
reasons.
Okay, no, it's interesting.
Also part of that conversation because building inspection had no way to properly inspect those dwelling units if they weren't within a mobile home park or other designated RV park.
You mean as far as having like an RV on every property allowed?
I mean, you'd have to put in the infrastructure. I mean, I would expect the
Yeah,
infrastructure. to
I
be
know
put in.
Bill has had concern about that before,
Right.
like, there's something just in terms of being able to keep up on the quality of the
Right.
those structures, I guess, and being able to, he doesn't
I get what you're
permit
saying.
that. There's no
Yeah,
building
right.
permit for an RV.
That's a good point. Right, yeah,
Yeah.
no, so, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think enforcement is a huge cumbersome task.
I just know we're going into a long-term planning effort and we will hear that as a concern. And it's difficult to separate the concern from what reality could look like if we had better staff, better resource, better whatever enforcement. So, just something would be helpful. to-
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let us know if the commission wants us to continue down that other path.
I think we have enough to work on right now.
You've got free time.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Speaking of which, let's, any other questions for Trish? All right, let's move on to the staff report from our workshop.
Did we approve our meeting minutes?
Oh, no, we haven't done it.
Oh, gosh. Thank you, Sue.
Anytime.
Yeah, all right, let's get back to that. So I was so excited to get to that after the file presentation. Are there any comments about the minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve.
A motion to approve the meeting minutes from our April 24th meeting.
Second.
Gonna-
You say third.
Third, all right, all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate
Yeah,
you.
sure, sure.
calling that out. We don't need to do anything with the commission's meeting.
No.
Those are just for our notes.
Yeah, just for your information. Okay. So at our workshop on April 24th, we had the county commission and the planning commission and members of the public attend. I think we had a great show, turnout of people to have this discussion. So we talked about the three main topics, which one was the lendability issue. And there's general consensus that we should look into this issue, and if there is a legitimate barrier here, that folks were generally open to, finding a solution to that barrier. But there was discussion and evidence being brought forward, and especially in a follow-up comment that there have been some HGHO properties that were purchased with through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae loans already. And so we're gonna need to do a little more investigating to find out what is really going on with the lendability issues, if this is an actual concern, or if we don't need to go down that path of modifying the rules and regulations on that. So we'll be continuing to look into that and bring forward what we find, the findings in the next round of, probably at county commission in a staff report. So the second thing we talked about was we had the active employment household eligibility requirements or qualifications. And in that exercise, participants were asked to rank 18 possible qualifications. And that was an interesting and kind of complex process, but we got through it. Ownership standards were the final topic that we discussed, and participants were asked to weigh in on proposed revisions that were specific to the ownership standards. So this is our it was really tough interpreting the results of the exercise for the eligibility requirements. But yeah, Noel and Mikkel worked on this quite a bit. They had a few different ways of analyzing the results, and then this was kind of the cumulative compilation of those different methods that they came up with. So in the green up here are the eligibility requirements that had the most consensus that were favorable, and then it goes down further. And so as you go down to like the red, those were like the least favorable, least consensus on those. And so I'll just break that down for you a little further. So the qualifications that have the highest level of consensus was, some of these are already in the land use code that are already incorporated into the HGHO requirements, so that wouldn't be changing anything. So works full-time, that's like the most obvious one, 30 hours a week or more. and for a business based in Grand County. And then at least one adult member of the household qualifies as an AEH, but not necessarily making up 50% of the household. So that last part there would be a change in our code. The remote worker employed by a company serving more than 75% local clients, that's already in the code. And then self-employed working out of their home with more than 75% local clients, that's already in the code. I believe the remote worker one is, I might be wrong about that, maybe it's just self-employed. And then owns a business within Grand County or San Juan County, serving greater than 75% local clients. So this would be, the only thing that would change here, I think, is that it would be including San Juan County. Whereas right now it doesn't, our code does not include that. And then works full-time for a business based in San Juan County. So that would be adding that, again, that region into the code.
So what are the, before you go on, what is new that's not already in the code?
Right. Yeah,
Kind of just, I'm seeing two bullets. Is
San
that-
Juan County.
so San
San
Juan
Juan
County
County.
for sure.
Yeah.
And then not requiring the members of the household to make up 50% of the household, but only requiring just at least one adult member of the household
Okay,
to qualify.
There was some conversation in the table talk that followed the exercise of maybe 75% local clients is too high of a bar.
Yes.
And also, how do we define local clients?
Yeah, and so later I have a slide where there were those modifications were proposed, so we definitely will talk about that as well. So qualifications with moderately high consensus was works part-time, less than 30 hours a week in Grand or San Juan counties, but has established residency by residing for the preceding 5 years in either county. And then the modification there was proposed that that should only be for occupancy, that you wouldn't be able to own an HGHO unit or qualify as an owner if you were only working less than 30 hours a week. Retired or not currently employed in either counties, but worked in the counties for the preceding 5 years. That one, I believe the 5 years that's already in there, but not San Juan County. So that would be the modification there. Established resident residing in Grand or San Juan counties for the preceding 10 years, but not necessarily defining whether they're retired or not, but just, or.
But there's your potential remote worker who's lived here for 10 years, but doesn't serve local clients.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And then qualifications with moderate consensus, established resident residing in either county for the preceding 5 years. So that just goes down that level of however many years you would define an established resident. A family member who acts as a caregiver of an actively employed household, providing childcare or something like that. Has children enrolled full-time in Grand County schools, owns a business within Grand County or San Juan County, serving less than 75% local clients. And then I don't think that modification really makes sense there, maybe, I don't know, less than 50% would be the modification on that. And then the least consensus was, and these were ranked the lowest for favorability. So a remote worker employed by a company that serves less than 75% local clients. So that kind of contradicts the previous one.
Well, I think the way we
But maybe
structured it was if you met this bar, not
Yeah.
meeting this bar didn't matter as
Right,
much.
that's right, yeah, so that would. Self-employed, working out of their home with less than 75% local clients. And then a seasonal worker who lives in Grand or San Juan counties for a period less than 9 months. And then college students who attend USU Extension or remote college. So then these are the qualifications that kind of need more clarification and have proposed modifications, like where people wrote down on the actual exercise, their little notes. So some people were proposing no percentage requirement for remote workers. And then maybe lowering it to 50%. And then also there was a note to say that we needed to define local clients better, which I could see being beneficial. Remote worker employed by a company that serves less than 75%. If they have a tax history, 3 years paying their taxes in the counties. That was interesting. Self-employed working out of their home, no percentage requirement again, or lowering to 50. And then the same notes were on this one here, owning a business within Grand or Salem counties, but serving greater than 75% local clients. Okay, and then this one was interesting. Kids enrolled in Grand County schools, but only if lived in, established as a resident for however many years. So that could be useful. And then for college students, somebody wrote down occupancy only. And then also if they attended Grand County schools, that they, if they were enrolled in a remote college, but they attended GC schools, that they would be able to qualify.
That would be covered if that 10-year requirement were
True.
adopted.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's again,
Right.
as long as you hit this.
Yeah, the other ones don't
The
matter.
residency requirement.
I guess I'm a little surprised by the seasonal workers still holding at 9 months. I'm thinking like, especially for occupancy, seasonal workers are one of the greatest strains for our local employers.
Yep.
And is 9 months a reasonable amount? 6 months, 6 months are reasonable? Like to me, 6, you get here in April, May, you leave in November, December, and mud season. Like, if we don't have people who can staff our businesses as seasonal workers renting these units, I think it's
Right. I agree with you on that. I mean, I think there was even a note, I think that should have been included on this list, that for seasonal workers, there was a note that said somebody wrote down occupancy. It would be okay if it was for occupancy only. Yeah, which would be the natural way that would go down anyway.
I'd love to maybe work with the chamber to do a quick survey of their members and just say, for your seasonal workers, what's the average number of months you believe people live here? Is it 12 months, 9 months, 6
Right.
months, or less than 6 months? Because if the majority says 6 months or less, do we have that data on the employee survey? No, okay, and that could be a cheap survey,
Yeah.
to just ask the commission, the chamber.
Hey, Emily, the majority of federal seasonal positions are 1,030 hours. State seasonal positions are 1,200 hours. The rafting season in Moab is usually April through October. I'm noticing the trend that seasonal workers' desired season is getting shorter and shorter. There are lots of cool things to do, and I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon because I'm not that old, but the younger kids are really looking to get out of here and move on to the next coolest thing. And I brought this up once before regarding seasonal residency. It's like pulling teeth getting seasonal workers to update their residency. And they're going to have to do that no matter what if they're showing some kind of, thing. And that's been a big hurdle, is getting the establishing residency, getting your Utah driver's license, getting your vehicle tagged in the state, doing those things that show residency is going to be important, I think.
If they could show proof of employment locally for 6
Yeah.
contiguous months, I think there's ways around that. And, if the young people want to light off early and go get a job somewhere warmer, if that's what keeps them here supporting our local businesses for 4 or 5, 6 months out of the year. I mean, it is one of the most consistent complaints that we hear from our local employers is the lack of a workforce, especially during our summer months. And if the intent of this program is to support workforce housing, this is one that is occupancy really only is this one, is that it would affect.
Yeah.
But if it would make it more viable for people to buy homes knowing they could rent it to seasonal workers, people who qualified for the ownership standard,
Right.
that would also maybe help with the viability of some of these existing projects come online. So that's
Just a mind-blowing thought, a high density multifamily residential apartment complex specifically for seasonal workers. No, Tony, stop.
I don't think it's that far off. Does anybody have any other comments on these? I mean, I think what I'm proposing to do with all of this is to kind of try to distill all this information into a draft redlined version of the code and
That'd be great.
our rules and regulations, and then bring that to the commission first as just a discussion, or at the workshop. 'cause We
Okay.
are gonna do that. We just
Next
confirmed
week.
that up
Okay,
with
great.
Mallory.
Okay.
So we'll have the workshop prior to your next meeting.
Great.
And just check in with you all about the direction that we're now going with all the input that we've got.
Okay.
And then we can get some guidance and then modify it if we need to, and then it'll come to a
Okay.
planning commission as a public hearing first, obviously, so. Unless you guys wanna have a workshop at planning commission, you won't get that quick enough.
I'm getting direction from the county commissioners.
But if you guys want to come and workshop, please do. Yeah, that helps.
There was some
It can
data
feel
points.
I think we're doing it next Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it's gonna be
At 2.
2 or
I know you have 2 different things we're gonna touch on, so can't remember which
the
one.
ADO ITA
Oh, right.
is happening.
You're gonna do that at 2.
I think so. Let me just make sure.
And so then it would be next Tuesday at 3-ish, I think, because, yeah, we're doing the ADO, the new intents to apply.
Yeah,
So the 16th.
yeah, on the 16th. And then Jock was saying, yeah, HDHO would be first at 2.
Oh, okay,
And then the ADO stuff would be at 3.
3. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, if you want to come, that'd be great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to speak.
No, great.
Before we move on to some of the ownership questions, I was wondering, and this might be later in your presentation, but there were some data points that were requested. So you already mentioned the question around lendability. I had asked about the 20% of HDHO units that aren't required, that aren't deed restricted. Do we have any data about whether any of those are sold?
They haven't gotten that yet, but it's on my list to get from Laura. Yeah, there's quite a bit of information I still need to get from Laura to kind of fill the gaps of our knowledge. So, yeah, it's in process.
I think a lot of my opinion on this hinges on that
Yeah,
question, because I
for
think
sure.
it tells us a lot about the program.
Are Laura and Ben gonna come to that workshop? I know we talked about having them come. Okay.
I hope so, yeah.
One or
The
the
last
other, okay.
one, they were out of town for a
Okay,
conference. and
okay.
So it's been kind of this, we've been missing each other because I was out of
Okay.
town all last week.
Right.
So, but now, yeah, we'll
Okay.
be getting together this week, hopefully
Okay, cool.
discussing some of these things
Great.
and getting more information in preparation for the workshop on Tuesday. And I'll make sure that they're aware.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I know Laura's out of the office all week this week.
Is she again? Dang it. That's that time of year.
Well, yeah, it's not
It
necessarily
might
for
be
fun
work
reasons.
related.
It's not for fun reasons, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But maybe Ben, I could
Okay.
try to reach out. to
That'd
Ben.
be great.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go on. So for this, the second activity of the workshop, we went through these kind of 3 main topics for which staff is proposing we revise the HDHO for these bigger items, which is removing the limitation of developer investor having to be qualified as an actively employed household. And I think we had pretty good consensus that we wanted to move forward with this revision, if that made sense. But going even further, there were some participants, that would seek to remove the ownership requirement altogether for all the HDHO units, and only restrict them for occupancy by ADH. So that is something that I think we're gonna have to like bring that up at the commission workshop and really get clarification on that. And then,
Is there any way to estimate how effective that would be in increasing the number of units available? That's
You
really the
mean,
objective, right?
getting them occupied by workforce?
Removing the ownership requirement altogether.
Well, what that would do effectively is just make it so that anybody from outside the county could own an
Right.
HDHO unit and then rent it out to workforce. And I think
Would that increase the pool of housing available, I
it
guess?
would
is the
increase the pool of rental housing, but not, of course, not for purchasing.
question.
And there's nothing we can do about rent, right? We have no ability to control rent.
Yeah, it's
But yeah, the argument has been made that it would naturally, rent would probably naturally be limited because of just the market.
Market forces are gonna have that, and a lot of that's unpredictable too. Let's say a big lithium mine that opens up next door and high-paid workers come in and they want to live downtown.
Sure.
All of a sudden, rent rates go through the roof.
Right.
They'd be allowed to buy.
And I would make the
If
argument
they
though
were,
that, I would just make the argument to offer a counterpoint to that, that by opening up the ownership to anybody, it would increase the rental availability and also the potential to own as well. Because when you look at the numbers, you have to build in a higher density, more units. And for a developer to be able to want to take on that risk and know that they have someone that
know
can sell. So if you cut out
Yeah, that's kind of where I
ownership from
was headed.
anywhere, then they just don't get built.
Yeah, that's
we-
kind of where I was heading with that too. I think it would have increased the pool of available houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand it could affect the rental rates, but I mean, there's only so much of that is controlled anyway.
Or I think if it remains that ownership has to be local, like the 300 that are out there, you know, that was the limit, right? Like they'll get built eventually, but there'll be these little small developments where you get like, you know, a family member gets, you know, do 2 there. So in like 10, 15 years, yeah, I think they'll be built, but
So this argument has been made of removing the ownership requirement altogether for the reasons you guys are discussing, but do we have any facts to back that up, that would actually like increase build out or to increase?
Well, the
Any of
build out,
This is why I
the
want
build
to
out,
know about the 20%.
Yeah,
that
because
aren't under-
people keep saying this, but I want to know.
the build out
numbers.
issue too is right now, there's a few of the big projects that aren't even at the point where they would be, they're not even construction yet, so they're like just this close to the finish line of like getting their final bonding and starting their improvements and all of that, and then there'll be like 200 more units on the market, so that would be where we could be like monitoring at that point, what is happening with those units.
Just to Steve's point though, is if they put the bonding up, but they don't build the units aren't on the market. They are prospective units. And we're gonna have to wait and see in all of this, but if the 20% of units that aren't deed restricted have not sold, I think that majorly undercuts the argument that opening up ownership would make these projects more viable. If on the other hand, those 20% sold within 6 months of being listed, I think now we have a different conversation about the way that the market forces. Now, granted, we are, or how many months removed from the massive interest rate increase, so the market has changed,
And
but
continues.
I do think that that's, that's why I want to get the data, because we
Yeah,
can
we
talk in
need it.
circles and circles about market effects and, this opinion about all sorts of neoclassical theories, but ultimately, what's happening on the ground is so.
How much data are we talking about in terms of the 20% of how many have already been built?
unfortunately, we're not gonna get that data, because in my experience, well, one, those units haven't been put on the market, and that's a strategy for real estate, which I can tell you all about, but I can point you in the direction of someone who can. But even if like the lag time for those units to get onto the market, like I don't think I agree that'd be awesome data to see, but I don't think we're gonna see it, at least in any, real
We
substantial.
already have enough
Like we might-
numbers to know.
Like we threw one market rate unit on to see what would happen.
What happened?
I think it just went live, so I don't know. So,
6 months from now, you'll tell us what the pulse is.
or.
Or 2 weeks from
Proprietary data.
It'll be.
Well, the only other, the PQ stuff, so
PQ,
they
we have-
can't build out subsequent phases. The build out has to keep that 80%. That's
phase.
critical. Yeah.
So in PQ, there's 16 in phase 1 that went out, that are out, like some of the first ones that got through the process. So 13 of those, I believe, are deed restricted, and then there would be 3 that would have been just market rate. So we could look into that for sure, see what happened to those. Yeah, and then the other really obvious change is that in the current code, it does not distinguish between what a multifamily, that multifamily developments would only be restricted for occupancy. And that basically, like, right now, the way it reads, the developer or the manager of an apartment complex would have to qualify as a local actively employed household. And so that's something that we brought up at the workshop, and I think there was consensus that that could be, that should change, that it would benefit. So you guys have any comments on that one?
One thing I would just throw out there is like kind of wrapping our minds around like what a single family house is gonna cost, no matter what, in Moab this day and age. Like, you're pretty much not gonna get anything for under $400,000. So I say that just to kind of go back on that ownership, we leveraging outside wealth just to get these things physically constructed.
But we know the USDA loans now apply to up to 600,000 was the data that Tony brought a couple meetings back, and 600,000 can buy you stuff
Or
like.
411.
Why did I think it was higher than that? I
don't know.
apologize. Imagining myself, all right, 400,000.
So there's, not to get too financy, but that USDA loan is it's a $411, $100,000 loan limit. The income limit is $66,000, but the thing is, they require a 28% front end DTI, which means that you virtually are not allowed to have any other bills. If you just do the math on an amortization table, they're absolutely allowed to have no other debt for that program, which is an interesting little caveat. That explains why when you call down to the Monticello USDA office, their wait list is 3 years long. Just a little bit more. I researched that program more since our last meeting.
Any student loans, yeah.
Not to kind of shoot the moon, but I wonder if the county commission, along with commissioners in Springdale, Park City, and so on, might write a letter saying that that program is broken, if indeed it is. Just,
One,
reaching.
there is gonna be a new Utah first-time homeowners incentive.
Oh.
Right, that I think is gonna come live in I think it's July, $20,000. And you only have to repay that whenever you sell the house.
Colorado
There's no
has been doing that for a
0%.
bit. Yeah, it's good deal. Cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, check it out, Tony.
Yeah, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Call me out in the commission meeting, man. Jeez.
I know you're fighting hard.
All right.
Okay, so the last proposed revision to ownership standards was this question about the code currently does not address what it would do with an ADU. So ADUs are more, generally they have to be either rented or they're just being occupied by a family member or somebody that hasn't signed a lease. But you can't own an ADU you can't sell it individually. So it's naturally a rental unit. So I think the idea here was like, they're already kind of naturally going to be for local residents, maybe not necessarily actively employed residents. So the question was posed to the group, do we really care if we should be restricting ADUs also to qualify folks as actively employed for that? And so I think that, I don't think that we had consensus on this one. It kind of went down a rabbit hole discussion. So I think this is definitely something I'd bring to put on the commission's agenda for the workshop.
This is different than the question posed to the county attorney regarding household size, is it?
Yeah, it is a little different, I think. Well, it was related because we weren't sure if the person occupying the ADU could be considered part of the household for the property, or if they're two different dwelling units, they were two separate households, and how that's defined. So that was something Stephen was going to look into.
I'll just say if you can rent an ADU, it can help you buy a home. You have an ADU.
Yeah, that's sure, that's out there.
Yeah, if you're living in Moab on Moab wages, an ADU could be pretty helpful, couldn't it?
That's how I survive. I live in the ADU and I rent my house.
Yeah.
And if the
Helps a
person,
lot.
the person living in the ADU is a remote worker, so you can afford your home for you and your family, is that where we want to draw the line?
I think that's a good point.
I would say it was fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's good to know. There's many paths to housing affordability. There's supply side and demand side.
Yeah, for sure. So I already went over this, but basically, we're gonna be continuing to investigate the livability issues in more detail and confirming whether or not that modification is needed. Develop a list of revisions to be included in the first land use code update and then kind of parse out the most kind of consensus-based ones. And those would be addressed in a potential follow-up amendment, the other land use code updates that we might want to pursue down the line could be addressed in a potential follow-up amendment. So parsing those out and then presenting that to the commission. Then we would propose a plan and a timeline for monitoring HDHO units after we've done the land use code amendment to see how the eligibility requirements and changes are helping or not. And then, obviously formatting the actual red line version, bringing that to the commission, and then we have the public hearings at planning commission and county commission to actually adopt that land use code update.
Whenever we do that, present to county commission for review and feedback, can we make that a joint workshop? So if there's any concerns, those can be caught before the planning commission.
That actually is intending to get that information ready for this upcoming
Oh, by
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Mhm.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Never mind.
That's great.
That's really fast.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, and y'all could join for sure.
Yes.
Lendability,
Mhm.
you may want to follow up with Corey at the city because
yeah,
we did this with our AEH.
Yep, I remember.
And
We
we-
talked about it a little. He's
Yeah.
kind of been,
Got the-
yeah, he's been providing a little input along the way too. And I know the city did include that language that one of the mortgage companies was kind of advising us that we should include as well for increasing the lendability. But yeah, there's just some confusion as to, we did do an update to the rules and regulations, and it seemed to address the issue for the county's HDHO program. And then apparently there were some units that were able to get purchased through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And so there's just some confusion as to whether or not we actually need that change or if we've already got it covered. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Corey's a great
Yeah, we've
resource.
got consult with bankers that we've worked with.
Yeah.
To make sure we get to a point where we all agree.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that, yeah.
Hitting pause very quickly, since it's 7 right after. We have the 6 o'clock citizens to be heard. I just want to say, we're going to wrap this up and then we'll come back to that. So if anyone's waiting to.
Yeah, I'm with that stand of my
Oh,
presentation.
great. And I don't see anybody in our waiting room in front of us. Okay. Any other questions for staff?
I have any questions? I do have just one comment about kind of the general results and also just the workshop. That may or may not be relevant, I guess, but it felt like all the workshop, we focused on things that were not just like actively employed housing definitions, and about like, just noticing a lot of the things on these lists have nothing to do with employment and are focused on residency.
Oh, there was, yeah,
We've been talking about that a
the
lot.
topic of primary residency versus like shifting to a primary residency requirement or.
No, just in general, just like discussing, and then at the end, we were kind of like, okay, are we talking about just HDHO,
Mhm.
actively employed
Oh,
housing,
right,
or are we
right.
talking about actively employed housing in
Yeah,
general? And
Right.
then within that, why are we discussing residency versus when the name
That's
of
a
the
good
definition itself is
we
employment?
did have a long discussion about that.
I'm just, yeah, I guess I just wanted
Yeah.
to bring that up because it, to me, like, feels like we focused a lot on the HDHO and not in general, and I'm just curious where we stand on that. And
And
Not that I'm like, that's not a criticism, it's just a.
No, I agree. I think that's something we're gonna need to work out more at the workshop for sure. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
And I agree. I mean, I think of one person who said, and I've been thinking about this as HDHO. But that's what we were discussing. And it was very late in the meeting. Yeah, at least it applies to HDHO, I would say, what you
Yeah,
kind of summarized, but whether it, whether it goes beyond that, well, I don't know what the next program's gonna focus on, like the alternative dwelling overlay is a different thing than the HDHO. It was designed for different folks.
right. And so the AEH definition currently only applies to HDHO. There's no other type of development that we have that uses that definition. So, but going forward with the multifamily residential zoning that we're gonna be starting to implement as a density bonus, then that would be the potential area where we would be applying that definition or creating a different definition, like primary residency. So, yeah, I think there's gonna be some need to like analyze that further and break it down. How we're using it.
My understanding with the future land use map is in proposing potential density increases, not just for the large density multifamily residential, that there would be some sort of graduated scale of density built in, which would hinge in part on some definition of housing for these folks, you get this more, housing for these folks, you get this more, where these folks is something akin to AEH. And I guess where I was getting confused is, we've been talking about that in these meetings for the last several meetings, that is baked into the future land use map. But if this AEH definition is not how we are quelling those folks, or defining who fits in that pot rather, we don't need to define it explicitly. I just would really like to know if the commission intends for us to move forward with a more narrow definition or a less narrow definition, because I think that would affect my perspective on how proposed future density might make sense laying out in the county based off of those trade-offs. So that was where my concern or confusion stemmed
Yeah,
from.
it's
Is
confusing.
if not this, then what? And we don't know what that what is.
So this is just an example of like what I've been working on with BAE, Urban Economics, those consultants, they're helping us, it's part of the housing studies, part of their scope of work to design the density bonus incentive and how it would be structured. And this was just like my first start at what it could maybe look like to have the graduated requirements. So like for multifamily, 8 units per acre, maybe it's just restricted. Maybe those developments are only restricted for primary residency. And we define that really well. And then maybe for, if you get the MFR 18 density bonus, you're actually required to do not only 50% restricted for primary residency, but also 25% for actively employed households. And then it would go, as you go higher in the density bonus, the requirement goes higher. So this is, I don't know, what they're gonna be helping us with is kind of basing these numbers on the actual housing need, with the housing study analysis that they've already done and completed. So it's gonna be really, hopefully tied to actual data and needs and justified in that way. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think it's just like reflecting on it afterwards. We've been studying this for a long time, and then after doing that exercise, it just kind of became really clear to me. It also just was kind of interesting to us discussing all the different qualifications that people have brought up of ways to qualify, like having children in the school district. That has nothing to do with employment.
Right. And
Like
so,
that has nothing to do with employment, to be honest. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't qualify for housing in some way, but like, so I'm just, I was just thinking more
so
about that.
so your kind of point is like the HDHO really, your one perspective is that you could say that HDHO was designed or intended to really address employment, right? And so we shouldn't be messing with it too much to make it so open that it goes away from its original intention.
Sure, or setting another definition and enveloping that into it of saying, we're gonna have some sort of residency or other requirement, but just, I guess, maybe I'm getting into the detail, like the unrelated details of the words of actively employed housing,
Right.
right? Because to me, actively employed housing, we're focusing on, employees and people who are in our workforce.
Yeah.
And then some of the other things are not
Mhm.
so related, but also important.
I know this table is preliminary, but I look at this table and I think this is the death of HDHO. Because if you can build an MFR 18 with only 15%, 25% restricted for AEH, and the HDHO units, you know, down the road are at 80%, or even multifamily residential 8. But no,
But I mean,
so someone with a HDHO, with the overlay applied to their property, has to be held to a 3 times standard to what we may propose here. If I own one of those properties, I would be immediately petitioning to have that overlay removed from my lot so that I can go build MFR 8 or 18 at this kind of density.
so the HDHO, so you're saying we have to go, we should be designing these percentages to be more in line with
No,
HDHO?
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that this is what BAE ends up saying is the appropriate, or something in this realm is the appropriate ratio. Then we're still holding out these, you know, 100 and something units that haven't been built at a substantially higher standard, losing that land that's already been invested in for higher density for local housing. Like it seems
Yeah,
fully
that's a
at
good point.
odds with either this is the standard and we're arbitrarily holding these few lots open to a much higher standard,
Mhm.
or something else. is
Yeah, so
right.
what's the right, yeah, I see what you're saying. That
Yeah,
opens
I mean,
up
maybe
the
we take out the
big
ADH
question.
completely, and these MFR districts are only meant for primary residency. It's a completely different program intention.
Well, I would
Right.
like to know what BAE
Yeah,
suggested, because I think going from 25% to
yet.
80% just because, I mean, I don't know.
they're still working on it. They haven't gotten back to me.
I think it should, you know, we're gonna go through this process with these consultants with these updated numbers. I think we should be open to the fact that if the numbers show a different path, that maybe the way we've been thinking about this program, given today's market conditions, is flawed. And,
Or maybe there's a better way.
or maybe there's a better
Yeah.
way. Yeah. So I don't know, but
So one
That's
other
gonna-
thing, one thing that Stephen Stocks, a comment he made in that meeting, in the workshop, had to do with something that I think both of you brought up earlier, which was enforcement. It was on a different subject, but he made the comment that whatever we do, make sure it's enforceable. And I think that's another issue with AEH, right, is that AEH can change fast if you're the one working. And
Especially.
how do you enforce that? Yeah.
I think it's the annual check-in. But I guess if you lost your job the day before your check-in.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and haven't found,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, what are would Hasu manage the AEH in the
That's to
future
be-
land? That's
That
still,
would be
okay.
to be determined, yeah.
Right, and is there some like baked in grace period? Is it that could be a job?
And I'm thinking, I'm thinking more along the lines of capacity, you know, for the HDHO, Hasu was used to check everyone's eligibility. Though if we open this up throughout the county, I mean, we're opening it up to substantially more
Right.
oversight and management.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
There's
right,
gonna have
yeah,
to be all
yeah.
that figured out, yeah.
It does make me wonder, as much as I want to move forward with improvements to the definition, and I think there's some obvious things with like the occupancy,
Yeah,
but it really makes me wonder seeing these numbers. If this is the preliminary numbers from BAE.
it's not. This is not what they.
Oh, that's just entirely.
It's just completely, like, just
playing
a
around.
starting point, just
Just
playing around, yeah.
Kind of an
Yeah.
example.
Example.
of-
Yeah. Well, I was just trying to come up with some like general breakdown of like what it could look like. And then this is what I sent them to say, this is kind of what we're thinking structuring, because I've heard, this is all based on what I've heard you guys, or maybe the commission and some of the comments that came out of the workshop was that there should be this graduated thing, and we, you know, we open up some of them for, it's restricted only for primary residency, some for actively employed, and then we even have the highest level of MFR 45, which would be restricted completely 100% for very low to low income. And so that could even be something we think about, is like maybe the income restriction should be the base that we are, you know, what we're basing all of this on, instead of AEH.
When do we expect those numbers from BAE? What's the timeline with you?
Well, so far, what we're working on right now is just this one, what I'm going to be presenting in the next two bit here. But yeah, so they haven't given me a timeline, honestly. They're working on other projects, not us right now. So, so I'm sorry to say, but I'm trying to get them to, yeah, work with us more, but, the strategy we had was we're gonna parse out this one land use code update for the MFR 45, get that done, and that will be kind of like a test.
Yeah.
And see how beneficial it is and if it gets used. And then we'll develop the other density bonuses as we go along. And I don't have a timeline, unfortunately. I can push for that, for sure.
Yeah, it'd just be helpful. These are all so interrelated.
Yeah, I think the idea was actually to get a little bit through, we're gonna work on it simultaneously, but we really do want to get the future land use map process done and adopted.
Without
because
knowing
it does-
how we would
We
graduate.
do need to do it simultaneously, yeah. But there's still some public process that we're doing, like the next workshop is gonna be all on commercial nodes and not really the residential question at all. So I still feel like we have some time. But we won't let it go too long. So, okay, so I'm gonna just do a quick debrief of the future land use plan residential density public workshop that we had on April 26th. And let's see. So I'll share my screen, what some of the materials that we presented at that workshop. So this one, we were trying to get members of the public to visualize what different densities look like. And so we got these renderings here that are color coded. And these are the different multifamily residential densities that we are proposing as part of the future land use map. So 8 units per acre, this was what kind of roughly what 18 units per acre would look like. And these are all kind of like 1 to 2 bedroom units. In thinking about, you know, the people that wouldn't need this kind of housing. This is, the blue is 35 units per acre, and then up to 45 units per acre is the green. And then so we had everybody come up to the maps and place their colors on the map. And so we could get an idea. This was the cumulative results of those. We had 4 different maps so that, you know, we had quite a bit of people. I think we had what, 30 or
30-ish.
yeah. And I was hoping we would have more, but it was a really beautiful day that day. And I think people were just like not interested in coming to the mark.
There's
But
something else going on that day too.
There
Oh,
might
I
be the
think it
water
was Chris, the
workshop.
water workshop,
Oh,
Chris,
right.
yeah, from USGS was
Mhm.
presenting.
Yeah, that was, it's hard to find a day that's not.
Mhm.
Especially this time of year.
Mhm. But so, yeah, it was kind of interesting. I mean, we had a lot of the green all over the place, which I thought was kind of surprising because I was thinking the MFR 45 density was going to be a lot more limited. But folks were kind of placing it all over. So, but you know, definitely more up into this area near town and then some back here against the cliff or the rim. And then the MFR 8 was pretty popular out here in this eastern part of the valley. So yeah, we're gonna like, basically, we're gonna take this information and incorporate it into the scenarios and keep updating those scenarios to reflect what the public is saying. We know within reason, there's gonna be certainly some things, some areas where it's not realistic to put some of these densities, so we'll have to parse that out.
So as you all know, the city's right now working on our water resource utility management plan.
Right.
It's starting to ramp up. And I know that the council has questions about the increased density in the valley and then the considerations of future water use as part of that conversation.
Yeah,
And if
definitely.
not, we
It is.
encourage you to do
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, and so one of the ideas to address that is to actually, we have a build out study based on our current zoning, so what we were gonna look at is the possibility of downzoning certain areas that already have like subdivisions that are already, say, 5-acre lots, and just going ahead and downzoning. That would be a policy decision that the commission would really have to think about in actually implementing that. But the idea there would be that it would balance out that if you're increasing density, then we should decrease it somewhere else. So we can not up the build out number by doing this. So one of the ideas that's been discussed.
I'm very concerned about water.
Yeah.
I'm on the GWISA board too, and on the Marlboro water. So, yeah, so I think we're very,
Yeah.
trying to be very conscientious.
Yeah, because as you all know, that's where all the development is. Moab
Yeah.
City is pretty much.
All the developments in San Juan County
Yeah,
actually is
yeah,
what we
San
really
Juan
need to be
County.
concerned about, right?
Oh,
Yeah, development potential, yeah, I agree.
Just a really quick question, maybe it's not quick, but is there a conversation like actively happening about, aside from development, other ways to cut our water use, as in like the state wide, like there's like the buyback program
yeah.
about getting rid of your turf grass and
we're
stuff?
working
'Cause
on
I haven't
that.
heard much about
That
it.
was in the paper this week.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah,
so-
we've already just started
Right.
to work with Ben from GWISA to formulate our proposed changes to the land use code to incorporate the language that we need in order to be qualified for that rebate program.
okay, but like in addition to that, are there other things happening?
There will
Also-
be, it's on our prioritization planning roadmap for 2023. We have the water conservation land use code updates slated. I think it was like for Q3. Yeah, so yeah, later in the year.
We talked about forming a subgroup prior to that, being something the larger body is looking at to support staff and researching other communities. And I think we're just kind of waiting for you to say, go for it. But I think if we had 3 folks from here and even 3 commissioners, to just aid with the research.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say go for it because there's no reason.
Let's
to
make that a
hold
future
back.
consideration.
Yeah, I guess I was asking
Yeah.
more in regards to like the county commission and not so much.
And I think
Our body.
our resource management plan is gonna guide policy. And that's what we anticipate that to be done at the end of the year.
Mhm.
And that's really gonna help all of us, because you guys are a part of that,
Right.
County and WISA and San Juan.
Exactly.
If we can keep everybody all on the same page, that'll help us guide the policy.
Yeah.
Big discussions. Sorry for.
No, that's great. It's all interconnected.
Thanks for the information.
Need more workshops.
Great.
No, it's really helpful. I do think there's something to looking at communities like Tucson, for example. and how
Yeah,
they've
for sure.
managed to maintain per capita water usage despite far
Yes.
more substantial growth than we're staring down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's doable.
We also had a questionnaire set up for folks to fill in, to give us feedback on the draft scenarios that we have. Currently, there's a scenario A and a scenario B. So we presented these at the workshop and had folks fill in a questionnaire. We don't have that analyzed yet, have the results compiled, but we're definitely looking at that. So this was scenario A, and basically what's being proposed as part of this future land use map is that residential density is located near existing higher density development close to the town center and also clustered around emerging neighborhood commercial nodes such as Spanish Trail Road and Mill Creek Drive. So these areas in here, we've already talked about that a lot. So we're familiar. The blue shaded areas, I tried to update the color scheme a little bit to try to make it clearer what, which residential densities are being proposed that are higher or kind of drastically different. So yeah, the blue shaded areas represent areas that are either already developed with higher density, like Royal Crossing, or this area is already zoned this way. Or proposed areas for future multifamily residential development ranging from 8 units per acre to actually up to 35 units per acre. And then the bright green layer is where the 45 units per acre would be proposed. And that's only right here so far. We haven't gotten really bold with that yet, but we're kind of waiting on the input from the community. So a density bonus at this level, the 45 units per acre, would require the development to be deed restricted for very low to low income housing. And then scenario B, which you're familiar with, it basically kind of it lightens the intensity of residential densities, like in those nodes, or especially in Spanish Trail. It remains a little bit more here, Mill Creek. But then the proposed South Valley connection down here is where more density would be located in this scenario.
I feel like this should be obvious, but I'm actually finding it's not. With that bright green, we're now with the, I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was a change in state law or a change in interpretation of state law, but we're saying that there is a path to capping rents essentially for low income, or is that only for apartment units? If it's offered as a density bonus, if it's offered as an incentive as opposed to a requirement.
It's through like the low income housing tax credit, which is that's a federal program, isn't it?
But if we're saying we potentially have the possibility of tying density bonuses to income.
Right, it's just like how we have, like HASU already manages some multifamily rental developments. There is that
They have to be multi-family
method
rental.
for, yeah.
So multifamily 8, for example, which could result in duplexes,
Uh-huh.
which are essentially single family homes in terms of.
I think it depends on the program that you are going through for income restriction. Do you know, Noah? That would be a question for HASU.
We wouldn't be able to, the question I would have is this opening the possibility for some form of deed restriction at an incentives level to be tied to income?
Yeah.
In which case, then the question of ownership becomes moot if
Oh,
rental
it's
caps is the
ownership.
reason why.
It's not rental cap. I'm sorry, I thought you were
So it's
talking
only,
about.
so we still
It's
can't limit it.
We can, if you provide an incentive, Utah state law says that you can restrict for income. You can require affordable housing based on income, if you provide the incentive. You can't just straight up start requiring. Right.
But if we said
Without
this
an
area
incentive.
is, quarter acre lots, but we will allow you to build up to 1/8 acre lots if the additional density is restricted for rent or buy, or only for sale to people who meet a certain
It
income requirement.
wouldn't matter about the rental rate, it would matter about the income. So it's based on the income.
So we could require that you rented to people of below a certain,
Right, exactly.
which would in self-enforce.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it is.
That's a
So
different
that's-
tool in the policy box than we've been talking about.
Well, I feel like we've been talking about it.
But if we're saying that that's the justification for not considering loosening or ownership standards for HDHO because of the effect on rentals, I realize that's retroactive, but looking forward, something's not fitting in the right hole for me. If we're saying going forward, we can do that, but it wasn't something we could do previously.
We could have, for sure, but we didn't want to restrict units for income with the HGHO. It was more about just restricting for the employment. And that way it was more about like, not trying to target a certain income level necessarily, like low income, but like actually targeting, I think it was naturally going to target like a moderate to high income, but still could not afford to buy a house in Moab. You know what I mean?
The only one stuck on this, so we'll move forward.
Well, I
Sure, with
always
you,
thought
Brian.
HDHO, people kept talking about teachers and firemen and
Yeah.
sheriffs and stuff. It's the reason I like the alternative dwelling overlay, because that probably is targeted at different folks. I don't remember exactly why we didn't income restrict, although I think our original income restricting stuff didn't offer any incentives.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that was it, that it just wasn't on the table, because if the concern is we can't expand ownership because it would make the rental too likely to be outside of the purchasing power of our workforce. But if we have this tool to allow for density incentives based off of income requirements, even on rentals. I mean, that's what I'm just saying. So
Yeah.
something's not squaring there
I think
for
we
me.
always had that ability. I just remember thinking that the HGHO was just designed differently.
Sure,
That's a completely different like idea.
Yeah, I thought there was an intent to not restrict based on income because of where that has not worked well.
Right.
in many
People
other
don't opt
situations.
into it. So I'm actually gonna get to that in the next topic. Because
That's
we
interesting.
currently do have that incentive in our.
I guess I was under the impression that that was, I called that wrong.
Okay, so yeah, this was, scenario B basically proposes kind of remaining with some lower to mid densities in this area and kind of concentrating more higher density down in these parcels that have not been developed. They're all still kind of large tracts of land down in this area. And then the idea would be connecting to the potential San Juan County South Valley community that is proposed. And so we will update you when we get more of the results analyzed on this, and we'll let you know how that came out. We do have the survey online as well on Grand County Connects, so people can go
Right.
to a Grand County Connects and go to the future land use plan page, project page, and then you can go take that survey and look at these maps and zoom in and study them and provide your feedback.
And you guys are advertising that quite a bit.
I think we,
Whether
did we do a
social
social
media.
media thing? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we should,
That'd
yeah.
be great. Yeah, that'd be good.
And then we could even maybe put something in the paper.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I think it'd be important, yeah.
Um, That was basic, that's all I had to kind of debrief you all on the workshop, and I think it went really well. It was well-attended and quality input we were getting. So.
Yeah, I think so too.
When's the next one? Tentatively May 31st, which I was thinking it was gonna be Memorial Day, but it's actually midweek. It's like Wednesday, it's the Wednesday after Memorial Day weekend. So we're tentatively scheduled for that. I just wanted to double check that there wasn't anything going on that would be conflicting, like at the city or anything, but I haven't.
Congressman Curtis is gonna give you that.
Hmm.
All right.
Is he here on the 31st? Yeah, right. I got him on, yeah, okay.
Shall we move on? Yeah, so our final agenda discussion item is on this topic of the MFR 45 density bonus incentive. So we're seeking planning commission input on implementing this land use code amendment to offer this density bonus incentive for very low to low income housing restriction. This amendment would be considered at the following planning commission meeting as a public hearing. This is in advance of the future land use map being adopted due to the timing of the low income housing tax credit application deadline. To be able to allow for potential low income housing to be developed sooner rather than later, we're trying to get this update through the process. So rezone requests for this district would be considered based on proposed locations for MFR 45 in the draft future land use map. And the density bonus for this would include the following considerations. So we'd be looking at allowing for a height increase of 42 feet. A parking ratio or parking reduction ratio of 1.2 stalls per dwelling unit. Whereas our current parking requirement for multifamily, which we only go up to 8 units per acre for multifamily right now. So MFR 8 requires 1.5 per dwelling unit for a 1-bedroom. If it's based on 1 bedroom or 2-bedroom, it's 1.75, and for 3-bedroom and larger, it's 2 parking stalls per dwelling unit. So we would be proposing a parking reduction to go down to 1.2 for this MFR 45. And the idea is that this type of density would be allocated or designated closer to town, you know, trying to connect with walkability to, and different kinds of transportation options so that maybe you wouldn't need so much parking. So let's see, we're also looking at bringing forward an amendment to the PUD section on density bonuses, because right now, we talked about how that section only allows for a density bonus for affordable housing, and that never gets opted into by developers, and so we're thinking of just simply modifying that to incorporate a workforce housing incentive. So it would be based on the AEH definition. Again, that would be another area where we would be applying that definition. So it really kind of hinges, this update would hinge on figuring out what we're gonna do with the AEH definition and if we're gonna have a different version of it or going with the same one across the board. And how that all shakes out. So those, I would hope to get the PUD land use code amendment to you guys by the next meeting, but I'm not sure how it's gonna work out. We'll shoot for that. But at the very least, we're gonna be bringing this land use code amendment for the MFR 45 density bonus. Okay. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that so far, just with the idea of going up to 42 feet. So right now, we only go up to 35 feet per building height. But we've gotten a lot of feedback from developers that that's pretty tough to work out for this kind of density and being up with the times, like creating units that are a little bit more, just nicer and have that ceiling height. So,
Still 3-story though.
yeah, 3 stories. Yeah, that's right. Mhm.
I think the city's 35 feet.
The city is? Yeah, I thought there was a proposal to allow for
It is
going
in our
higher.
AEH, but it was only up to 35.
Okay,
I think that's, pretty sure that's what we did.
okay. Yeah,
Because developers always say you have to go higher.
I know. The reason I was thinking differently is that project that is being proposed as an annexation.
Oh, yeah,
I thought that one was gonna be allowed to go higher.
it is, but 35 feet, pretty sure. And that is too, and the reason for that is because they want to have higher, see, they're only gonna go 3 floors, but the floors are gonna be higher.
Mhm. Right,
And I think there's gonna be 80 units in that apartment.
I think you're right, yeah, that sounds about right. Well, we'll
Yes.
double check on that, but
Okay. Yeah, it'd be good to look at, make sure that the city's doing.
yeah, for sure.
Is there a specific type of input you're looking for from the body at this point?
I mean, I guess just if you think that this is a reasonable,
Lisa, could you do again? I mean, I was on the slide when it was up there.
oh,
What are the combination? Oh, yeah, maybe the slide up there. I want to know the kind of combination of AEH and
Oh.
low income and was it?
so this one doesn't have anything like that. It
Oh.
would only, so because it's going up so high in the density, this would be the highest we'd ever go. I mean, so far that we've talked about. Multifamily, 45 units per acre. This density bonus would require 100% low income restricted. It would be debatable whether we very low to low income.
Gotcha.
There's, we'll base that on what the actual need is, but, yeah, that's what we've got so far. So in reality, I foresee this kind of density bonus being allowed or designated on the future land use map in very limited areas. You know, so there wouldn't be like just the whole neighborhoods, but it would be kind of in the most appropriate places.
Would this could be student housing? Because they have low income?
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay,
Any
great.
other comments? Future considerations, just if anyone has any interest in researching some of the water policies of other communities, why don't we make that independent study for now, and we'll, as we get closer to the next meeting or two, if there's interest in doing some kind of like study group. Yeah, we can organize that, but we don't need to work on that right now. If it's something you're interested in, let Elisa know, and we can talk about that maybe at our next meeting. Okay, anything else? Any other
I'm gonna
future
just quickly announce, I'm not gonna be here from about the 11th through the 30th.
Ooh, okay.
So I'm just off. You can feel bad for me. We're doing the West Scottish Way as a trek.
Ooh.
Oh.
Good for you.
So shed tears for me.
Yeah. fun.
He is retired. We just
He's
are like
retired.
working on like a dog.
That's right.
I know, I'm always like emailing him.
Well, with that,
Emily, actually,
Yeah.
sorry, we just have an EDU event that the
Oh,
Housing
yeah.
Task Force is putting on. It's
Yeah.
going to be on the 24th, which is a Wednesday, at the Mark at 5:15 to 7:15. And the whole idea is kind of to walk people through, if they're thinking about putting an ADU on their property, what are the different steps in the process? We have a flow chart that we've put out to help you visualize like all the different people you'll have to interact with. And then it's gonna be kind of a due diligence workshop. And we'll have some city and county staff there. We'll have financial lenders, we'll have contractors.
Cool.
We can go around and
Yeah.
start making connections and like formulating the idea. in
That's
your
cool.
brain of how
Really
to
cool.
actually
That's great.
execute.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
And you guys are putting that out in social media,
Mhm.
Yep.
maybe the newspaper.
Yep.
Newspaper, that's great. That's good.
very cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so along those lines, we wanted to, the housing series is put on by the Housing Task Force. And one of the ideas too was to continue the housing series and maybe propose doing the next one on HGHO.
Yeah,
Once we
that's great.
have the revision down,
Yeah.
and then we can go out and educate the public and potential buyers on how they could qualify.
Great.
Let's, really clarify what the new standards are, so there's no confusion.
Great.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right.
Cool. Thanks as
Motion
always,
adjourned.
girls.
Toby,
Very
seconded by
hard.
Steve, all in favor?
Thank you, guys.
Just got to hit our powers. Keep the groceries.
Wait, what?